Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I have 6:28. My name is Jessi McClellan, and I am the Executive Director of the Georgia Arborist Association. Welcome, everyone, to our second bi-monthly webinar of the year. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we officially get started. We are going to hear from Jessi Pollard here in a few moments, but first, just a couple of reminders. If you're here for CEUs, I will drop a link in the chat toward the end of the program, so keep an eye out for that. It'll ask you to fill out a brief survey. We'll get those CEUs submitted, and you can expect to see it on your ISA dashboard in a couple of weeks. We have a number of upcoming programs to keep an eye out for. First and foremost, we have a social event coming up in April, on April 18th. That was just announced today. There's going to be door prizes and beer and food and fun times, and there will also be a training opportunity for gear inspection. So if you're a climber or if you're a business owner or manager, it's a great opportunity to learn more about gear inspection. So check out our events page to learn more about that. We also have two new offerings this year that we're providing. One being the wildfire risk reduction for arborists. We've never offered this program before. The training comes out of Texas, and in partnership with the Georgia Forestry Commission, we'll be offering this class in Gainesville in June. So brand new qualification. Another brand new qualification that we have registration opened up for now is the TPAC, the Tree and Plant Appraisal qualification. That'll be hosted in conjunction with the ISA conference in August. So make sure you check out our events page to see more information about that. If you have questions during this presentation, please ask questions. If you don't mind dropping them into the Q&A, I will stop Jessi in the middle of her presentation and ask her questions as they come in. She has agreed to answer those questions as they happen. So please feel free to ask questions and help along the conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Jessi. Jessi Pollard is a graduate of the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources at UGA and has worked with Georgia Power Forestry and Right-of-Way Services since 2018. In her role at Georgia Power, Jessi oversees all vegetation management along the distribution lines in Eastern Metro Atlanta. She is an ISA certified arborist, utility specialist, track, Georgia licensed pesticide applicator, and Georgia State registered forester, and also has the wildfire risk reduction qualification. Outside of her work, she and her husband enjoy running their small cattle farm in West Georgia, and she's also a board member of the Georgia Arborist Association. Thank you, Jessi, for being here this evening and agreeing to give us this presentation.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Jessi. I will go ahead and share my screen here. Yes, as Jessi said, if you've got a question while I'm presenting, please feel free to ask it. I would rather answer it right when it comes to your mind while I'm fresh on that topic. So I can't promise that I'll have all the right answers, but if I can't provide an answer right here, then I will definitely look it up for you and try to find you an answer and reach out to you separately. So if you were attending the Georgia Tree Council Trees and Electrical Safety this morning, then you saw me on there as well. So welcome back. You're getting a full day of utility arboriculture, which really warms my heart. So a little bit about me. Jessi gave me a great introduction. I graduated from University of Georgia Warnell School of Forestry in 2017. With a degree in forestry and a degree in wildlife sciences. Was then hired on with Georgia Power in the East Atlanta area as a utility arborist. Just recently, actually accepted a job as a supervisor in that group. So I've sort of moved over to the west side of the state, which is great because that's home for me. So now kind of overseeing arborists in Columbus, Smyrna, and Jonesboro areas. My husband and I own a small cattle farm here in Carrollton where we live. We raise registered Hereford cows, and I included a nice picture of one of our moms and her baby. And then the picture in the middle is just me and some of my peers on a storm restoration event in Louisiana. So through this job with Georgia Power, I've just gotten to do a lot of really great things, had some great experiences. Very passionate about the topic, very passionate about sharing it, outside with my peers who are in the utility industry, but also my peers that I've met and networked with that do not work in the utility industry. So I want to share a little bit about today's agenda and our goals for this presentation. So I'm going to give you an overview, a very small overview of the electric grid. I'm going to hit mostly on distribution electric facilities because that, for the most part, is where you're going to encounter the High Voltage Safety Act and working with 811 the most, in my opinion. We'll talk a little bit about utility vegetation management in general. Then we'll dive into the High Voltage Safety Act, some frequently asked questions, and then some Georgia Power specific tree inquiries that we get. So really my goal for this presentation is to increase your awareness of electrical hazards, obviously, and then also to increase your knowledge when interacting with your electric utility. So a lot of what I'm going to say today is going to be specific to Georgia Power because that's where I work and that's what I know. But if you do not work frequently with Georgia Power, if you don't live in state, you may work with a different utility. I can't tell you what exactly their policies are, but I think this will give you a really good foundation just to kind of understand what you're working with if you are planning to do any work kind of around or near power lines. So here is kind of our overview of the electric grid. So you can see here in the top right, we've got generation. So those are our generating plants where we actually generate the power, the electricity. That power is then taken to these very large transformers where they're picked up by transmission lines. And those lines are those really big ones that you see on the super tall structures, on the really large cleared rights of way. And those lines run cross country and kind of feed into transmission substations. And they will go for miles and miles and miles, kind of hitting these substations on the way until they get to a distribution substation. So out of a distribution substation, you get distribution lines. So what those lines are going to do is kind of a step down of that voltage. So what that distribution line is going to do is take that electricity and it's going to step it down and move it through our cities and our towns and our neighborhoods at a voltage that can feed our homes eventually and our businesses. So then the distribution lines run through your neighborhood, then they run through transformers to service lines where it steps down that electricity to a voltage that your home or your business can handle. So, you can see in this graphic that you've got two different kind of distribution lines that fork off here. One goes to residential consumers, which is your home. The other is going to go to commercial or industrial business consumers. Those can be very large consumers or can just be, local businesses. So that's kind of, like I said, a really high level overview of what the electric grid looks like and how that power runs. So like I said, I'm going to focus probably a lot more on distribution than I am transmission in this particular presentation. And this slide right here is basically an overview of the anatomy of a distribution line, a distribution pole, and some of the hardware that you might see on that pole. So at the top here, you can see we've got what's labeled as primary electrical conductors. We just kind of refer to that as the primary or the primary line if we're speaking. And those are typically located at the top of the pole. At least in Georgia Power's case, they're always at the top of the pole. So when you're looking at a wooden or a metal power pole, the lines at the very top, those are going to be your primary electrical lines where that electricity is running down. And those are bare, uninsulated, so that electricity is able to just run straight through. If you're looking at that pole, you might see kind of a cylinder or a canister, and that's going to be your transformer. So that power that's running down that primary line runs into that transformer and steps down the power to service a home or a business, because our homes and typical businesses can't take the electricity coming straight off of those primary lines, because you're talking about, you know, about 25,000 volts in a typical main line 3-phase. So if you've got 3 wires up there, you're talking 25,000 volts. Our homes can't withstand that. So then what that transformer does, it steps down the power and it runs through what we call a service drop or a service line. And this is what runs from the pole to your home. And you may see that it looks a little different than the lines that are running at the top of the pole on the street. It has kind of a coating on the outside of it. And so that line takes the electricity and runs it straight into your house, where it can then power your house at a voltage that your house can handle. If you're still looking at this pole, you'll see a lot of times at the very bottom of these poles, so the last set of wires that you see, that's going to be your phone or your cable TV. Some of these are not in service anymore. It may be old wiring, but some of it may be in use in certain areas. These are going to be a lot thicker than any of the Georgia Power or the power line facilities that you see on that pole. And we kind of have no bearing on what happens with these wires. So we may kind of have a joint use agreement where that phone or cable company can utilize our pole to house their facility. But in terms of maintenance, not something that we as the utility kind of oversee or handle. So I talked a little bit about this already, but just some voltage basics. So if you're looking at kind of like your household voltage, so, you know, a plug that you have in your house, you're looking at typically around 110 to 220 volts. And, you know, this can give you a pretty good shock if you come into contact with this, and can be devastating depending on, you know, what you're doing and where you come into contact with it. So then you take that and you think of these power lines that we have. So a distribution line is going to run basically anywhere from 12,000 to 25,000 volts. And that just depends on how many wires are on that pole. So in this middle picture here, if you're looking at the very top of this pole, you'll see kind of an arm and then 3 little dots or little mushroom shaped objects. And then you've got 3 lines kind of running horizontally at the top of that pole. So those are your bare power lines. That's where all your voltage is running through. So this line in particular is going to have 25,000 volts of electricity running through it. Well, then you take a look at our transmission lines, and you'll see that those will go anywhere from 46,000 to 500,000 volts. So, you know, we're talking a lot of electricity here, a lot of current running through these lines. So, you know, that really kind of creates the basis of why we as a utility kind of keep these lines clear and have the responsibility to do that, but also why we want the public to be very safe around these lines, because there's not very much wiggle room when it comes to interacting with these. What you got?
Jessi, we got a question in the Q&A.
Okay.
John Harris says, for clearance trimmed between wires like a single phase primary, does Georgia Power have distances to cut that include considering average annual growth or a different tree species or a more standard overall average trim distance?
Sure, that's a great question. And we will talk a little bit about pruning maintenance in just a second. But when it comes to the different voltages, we kind of keep a standard distance. So we like to keep 15 feet on either side of that power line, that right of way. And what this does is it accounts for that annual growth. It really gives us the room that we need for those lines to stay clear so that we provide reliable electricity. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we are, you know, going to cut and dry, get 15 feet every single time. Tree species does come into play in some instances. So, let's say that we need to prune a dogwood tree. Well, dogwood trees don't grow very fast. They don't grow all that tall. We still need to make sure that it's going to be clear from the line, but we may not come through and cut 15 feet out of it if it is in our right of way. So we try to be as dynamic as we can while still making sure that we get that clearance from the line and making sure that we are preventing that tree from growing into the line before we can get back to it. So, some of our faster growing species, sweet gum, poplar, oak, those hardwoods, you're going to see us probably be a little more aggressive with those than you would maybe a magnolia or a dogwood or, a species like that, Japanese maple. We really do try to, as much as we possibly can, kind of take into account those species, their growth rates, and kind of take a look at those things when we do come through for our maintenance. So I hope that answers that question. So what is utility vegetation management? So just, plain definition, utility arboriculture addresses vegetation around high voltage power lines, phone lines, and other utility installations. So obviously what we're talking about here is high voltage power lines, but really utility vegetation management can be, any utility. So, gas line rights of way, there's vegetation management for that utility. Like I said earlier, AT&T has vegetation management, and things like that. So really it encompasses more than just power lines, but that's what we're focusing on here. So why do utilities prune trees? And really, to me, it can be simplified into two buckets. So you've got the safety aspect and you've got the reliability aspect. And what I mean by reliability is, as a electrical utility, we're responsible for providing reliable electricity to our customers because that's what they're paying for. So, we really strive to do everything that we can to make sure that we don't have these conflicts with the power line, because as soon as a tree comes into contact with the power line or even is close to coming into contact, you've got a potential for an outage, and a prolonged outage in some circumstances. So this photo on the right, you may have seen it. It was a video that circulated a few years ago, but just an example of a tree that got into a line, and instead of the power going out immediately, which happens quite often, that line stayed hot. And so that tree caught on fire, continued to burn. So anyone in close proximity to that tree, when it contacts that line, is at risk for receiving electric shock, or being electrocuted even. So that's really kind of why we do what we do. So I'm going to start and talk a little bit about reliability. So this kind of goes well with the question that was asked, I think. This is a graphic that Georgia Power came out with in our Right Tree, Right Place pamphlet. Is really kind of just a good way to explain what we're looking for in trees that are planted and why we prune certain trees based off where they're located. So you see on the far right here, we've got sort of our right of way with the power pole here. And then on either side, you've got 15 feet. So that is our desired pruning distance on either side. And that's what we acquire in our easements. So pretty standard is going to be 15 feet on either side of that pole, as well as above it and below it. And really, when you're talking about below it, really nothing should be planted within that right of way. So the underneath of the line should be relatively clear, just for access issues. Volunteer growth underneath the line, that gets a little hard for us to maintain well. So then you kind of move out here to this low zone. So this is where you want to see anything in this zone to be 25 feet height or less. And the reason why we say that is because if you've got, big, huge oak trees growing within this space, more than likely they're going to have growth that's going to come out towards that line. We're going to end up having to maintain it, which, is great, keeps me in the job, but then you've got that conflict that we're having to come back and address every single time we come through. So if you've got an empty space there, we're saying, hey, please don't plant a tree that's going to grow to be 25 feet or more, because you're just setting us up to have to do more maintenance there. And that means you as the homeowner, you're going to see us every time we come through. And we, just prevent that altogether by not planting the tree there. And then obviously, as you get kind of further away from that line, it gets, more and more lenient in terms of what height we recommend those trees being, for that same reason. So, they're going to have tree parts that are growing out towards that line. They're going to have to be trimmed. If that tree falls, obviously you've got the risk that, depending on how tall it is and how close it is to the line, it may tear that whole line down. It may break the pole. You're talking about hours without electricity at that point. So this is kind of the graphic that we use to sort of describe, what's best practices when it comes to planting trees or even evaluating trees that you have on your property. So in terms of reliability, obviously we as a utility have to provide some vegetation maintenance. And we've got two buckets of kind of power line type, and I've described a couple of them already. So you've got transmission versus distribution. So for transmission, those are your big towers on the big rights of way. You're going to see that easement is a lot bigger than what you see on distribution, for a few different reasons. Obviously, you've got way more voltage running through there. You've also got federal regulation part of certain transmission lines depending on voltage. So if it's over 230,000 volts, a federal regulation actually comes into play. So Georgia Power could potentially be fined, I think, up to $1 million a day, if we have an outage caused by vegetation on those rights of way. So for transmission, those are going to be really concrete, kind of walled off rights of way in most areas. So the types of maintenance that we do on those rights of way, so obviously we're going to do tree pruning. So you may see us with bucket trucks, mechanical trimming, which is a big machine with an arm on it and a blade at the end. You may see us climbing trees to trim them. We mow these rights of way on schedules, not every year, but we will come through and mow. We do herbicide application. So this is kind of a targeted treatment of woody species. So we're trying to promote, grasses and, native plants for pollinators. We want to promote that kind of flora under our lines. And we want to kind of get rid of those woody species, sweet gums, pines, poplars, that stuff that kind of pops up volunteer. And then also danger tree removal. So we're patrolling those lines every year, looking for trees that are uprooting, dead, have structural issues, could pose a threat to that line. We want to eliminate those before they become an issue. On distribution, we do a little bit less, but still a lot of this preventative maintenance. So again, you'll see us pruning either from a bucket truck, from a mechanical trimmer, or climbing trees where we've got lines that are inaccessible by truck or run through backyards. In those circumstances, we also do herbicide application on our distribution rights of way. Again, this is a targeted application. So we're kind of spot spraying those woody species in that right of way, making sure that we kind of catch anything before it becomes a larger issue. If we can get it while it's young and while it's little, it's kind of better for everybody. What you won't see us doing is really mowing. We don't mow our distribution rights of way. We rely on that herbicide application. And we will do some reactive tree removal. We're not necessarily doing scheduled danger tree patrols on those distribution lines. So here's just some photos of what you may see us doing. So this top left photo is actually a helicopter. So that's something I didn't mention in the previous slide, but we have done some aerial pruning with a helicopter. Has been very useful in doing some right-of-way reclamation. So really eliminating some overhang in our areas where we just don't have great access. So think of like really difficult terrain or real rural areas. This is a great way to kind of reclaim that right of way and get it perfected. We've utilized it a lot in areas where we have a lot of outages historically to try to really alleviate a lot of those issues. In the middle top, you'll see a giraffe. So I was talking about the machine with the long arm and the blade on it. So there'll be an operator in this machine and he'll kind of, be trimming with that arm. These two applications are going to be mostly side pruning. So you're going to see us side pruning trees. You won't see either of these applications used when either V'ing out or using L cuts, which are all proper pruning methods for utility clearance. And then you've got a couple of pictures of just kind of routine bucket maintenance, which is probably what a lot of you have seen in neighborhoods or, going through town. We use buckets mostly. And then you've got a mowing crew here in the bottom middle. And then finally on the right side here is kind of what our herbicide crew setup is. So like I said, this is a targeted application, not a broadcast application. So these crews go through are really targeting those woody species to eliminate with these backpack sprayer type setups. So next, I'll talk a little bit about safety guidance. So, I want to talk a lot about safety around power lines. I want to make sure that you're equipped to know what to do if you encounter a downed power line, or if you're wanting to do work somewhere on someone's property, but there is a power line present. I just want you to have the tools in your toolkit, kind of know what to do in those circumstances. So, obviously, never climb power poles or transmission towers. Hopefully, that's a no-brainer. Very dangerous. Obviously, if you're not a line crew working for a utility, there's really no reason for you to need to do something like this. So like I told you earlier, a typical overhead distribution line has about 7,200 volts per wire. So like I said, if you've got, a line with 3 wires at the top, you're going up to, 25,000 volts. So not something you want to mess around with at all. And then even worse, voltages on major transmission lines are as high as 500,000 volts on Georgia Power System. You don't want to come into contact with either of those. More than likely, you're not going to fare very well against them. So number one, never climb those structures. I've also never climbed trees near power lines. And I really ask you just to kind of take a look, at your property, any property that you're doing work at. And if you see a tree that is growing up into or near a power line, just, don't climb that tree. If you've got a question about it, you can always reach out to us. We'll come out and take a look at it and kind of provide some information on the area that you're in. The human body is an excellent conductor of electricity, and that electricity is always looking for a path to ground. So if that electricity jumps off of the power line onto that tree and you're in the tree, then you're going to become part of that path to ground. So those are sort of my first two recommendations when sort of coming into contact with power lines. So let's say that you come across a downed power line. So, either a tree fell on the line or, for whatever reason, the line came off the pole and is on the ground. Even if you're not 100% sure if it's a, live wire, always assume that a downed power line is live and life-threatening. I can assure you that no one at Georgia Power, and I wouldn't think any other utility is going to make fun of you for calling in and asking somebody to come and take a look at a line, even if it may be a cable line or a service line. Better safe than sorry, obviously. So, stay away from those downed power lines. Always assume that a downed power line is live, because when those lines come down, whether it's from a tree or for some other reason, a car hits a pole and the line comes down, that electricity doesn't necessarily stop. That line can actually continue to be hot as it lays on the ground there. So always assume that it's energized. Stay away from it. Keep your children and your pets back. Don't drive over to it. Don't try to bypass it. Just call 911. 911 will reach out to us and let us know that there's a power line down in the area. And obviously, don't walk up to it. Don't touch anything around it.
Hey, Jessi, we've got another question from
Okay.
Stephen Johnston. What is the easiest way to contact you when we have a conflict with a tree we need to work on?
So the easiest way to come into contact with one of our arborists is going to be number one, you can call Georgia Power's customer service line and speak to a representative. They can route it to us. So what they do is they create tickets for our arborists to take a look at, or you can actually go onto Georgia Power's website, and I believe I included in here, but it's georgiapower.com/trees, and that will take you to our forestry and right-of-way website. There's actually a form that you can fill out there as well, that kind of reaches us internally in forestry and right-of-way. And you can ask questions there, and they get very quickly routed to the arborist for your area. So either one of those options is kind of what I would recommend. Not only is it going to make sure that you get to the right person, but it's also going to document that you made a request, and it's going to document that it was routed to one of us out in the field. And with that being said, we'll always come out and look at something. So no matter what the request is, if you're asking us, hey, I want your opinion on something, hey, can you come and look at this and let me know, somebody's going to come out and talk to you and take a look at that in person. So definitely recommend calling in. I can't always promise that we're gonna give you exactly the answer that you're looking for if you're making a request to us, but we will always come out and take a look and talk to you. So moving along with safety around power lines, obviously keep ladders, antennas, kites, and poles away from power lines. Not only is this coming into play around our power lines that I've been discussing that are uninsulated, that sort of run along the street that we maintain, but also applies to the line that runs into your house. So I said earlier that these lines kind of have a coating on the outside, and they do, but that coating is not 100% protection for you. So that doesn't mean that, hey, I can lean my ladder up against this line, or hey, I can reach up and pull this line with a pole, or hey, I can, do this work. We're never going to recommend that. I will say that we will disconnect that line for you so that you can do any necessary work. Because you just really never know about the integrity of that coating on that line. So a squirrel may have chewed a little bit on it, or for whatever reason, it may be frayed a little bit. And so you just can't guarantee that it's not going to cause you some harm if you get up there and contact it. So while it is different from our main line that runs most of the time along the street or through town, or running at the top of those poles, that line that comes out of the transformer into your house, wouldn't consider that 100% safe for you to contact or do work around without kind of reaching out to us about having it disconnected. So now that I've got through that, I want to talk a little bit about the High Voltage Safety Act. So what is it? So I took this from the High Voltage Safety Act. The purpose of the High Voltage Safety Act is to prevent injury to persons and property and interruptions of utility service resulting from accidental or inadvertent contact with high voltage electric lines. So, per Georgia law, if you're going to be working near overhead power lines, number one, you must call the Utilities Protection Center or 811, literally dial 811 on your phone to request safeguards for that work. If you'll be working within 10 feet of an overhead electric line, you must notify 811 at least 72 hours in advance of that work. And the reason for that is if you're going to be working within 10 feet and you are not qualified to be working on behalf of the utility, you must notify that utility through 811 that you need to do that work, because that utility is going to have to do some things to kind of plan and make sure that, you know, that work is going to be safely done. So you'll see this table on the right shows minimum approach distances. So essentially that is the limit for how close your body or any equipment that you're working with can be to that line. So if you think back to when we were talking about voltages, what this is saying is 50,000 volts and less, which is going to be all distribution lines, you're going to have to stay at least 10 feet away from those, unless you're working on behalf of the utility. So this is a chart, like I said, that shows minimum approach distances. This first one is what is most relevant to us, but you can see kind of as you go down the list and the voltages increase, the distance that you have to stay away from them obviously increases as well. So what is the utility's responsibility when we're talking about 811 and the High Voltage Safety Act? So what the utility must do is they must contact the person making the request within a reasonable time frame. So the way it works is if you're wanting to do work around a power line, whether it's within 10 feet or you know, just kind of near that power line, you're not sure if it's 10 feet or closer, or you know, it's outside 10 feet, but you'd still like to notify 811 and have someone from the utility talk to you. What 811 is going to do is that they're going to take that ticket that you submitted, and then they're going to contact the utility. So then what the utility has to do is they have to contact you, making the request within a reasonable time frame. So they can't go months and months and months without, you know, reaching out to you. Typically, it's going to be a matter of days. Then they're going to have to arrange for some safeguards to be put into place so that you can do the work that you're wanting to do. And what that kind of means is coordinating a work schedule. So, you know, when the removal or the pruning will be done by you or your company, and determining cost and payment for the safeguards that need to be put into place, which we'll talk a little bit about. So like I said, they're going to have to formulate a plan to guard against danger, or they're going to have to arrange for some safeguards. So what that might mean is de-energizing the line, relocating the line, in some cases, installing protective covering or a barrier on that line. You may have seen them before, kind of like a hose or a blanket that goes over the line. That utility is going to have to put in some work and work with you as the customer submitting the request to try to get this work done safely. Now, I do want to hit on this point. So I said a second ago, you know, de-energizing or grounding the line, relocating it, or installing protective covering. So Georgia Power specifically doesn't consider protective covering a sufficient barrier. So we will not cover the line for you if you're wanting to remove a tree privately. We just don't feel like that's really the safest way to kind of protect you from that danger. So we will not do that in that instance. We're going to either de-energize that line, or in extreme cases, relocate it. But most of the time you're gonna get kind of an offer to de-energize that line for the work that you're doing. So I also talked a little bit about cost. So what determines cost? So voltage can determine cost. So you've got single phase lines, which is just one line at the top of the pole. It's going to feed less customers. Less customers are going to be impacted by de-energizing the line. Or you've got multi-phase lines, which are going to impact more customers. That load is a higher volume of load. And so you may be talking about taking a whole neighborhood out of power in order to do your tree work. So the cost for that's probably going to be a little bit higher. You're also talking about the nearest protective device. So a protective device is kind of something that protects certain areas of the circuit from unwanted outages and sort of, for lack of a better word, kind of breaks the circuit up into sections so that when there is an outage, the entire community or the entire circuit isn't impacted. It may just be a few customers. Required manpower. So, how many line crews are they gonna have to send out there to de-energize this line? How much work is it gonna be? How long are they gonna have to spend on it? Number of grounds needed, which kind of goes back to that protective device requirement. So, how many times are they gonna have to kind of ground the line to make sure that you're safe doing your work? Kind of in between those places that they've de-energized or that they've grounded the line. And then the involvement level of our control center. So in certain circumstances, we may have to get our control center more involved, which is kind of like a remote center where they can kind of see the whole grid and they can operate certain devices and make decisions remotely. If we've got to get them, heavily involved, you may see that cost go up a little bit. What you got,
Hey,
Jessi?
Jessica, we had a couple of questions come in. One from Tyrone Crawford. Is the High Voltage Safety Act a federal rule?
So yes, the High Voltage Safety Act is federal, and then there's different requirements potentially for different states.
And then the next question from Nathan Neeson is, at what point will a power company remove a tree if it's a threat as opposed to a tree on private property that would reach the lines if it fell? Wouldn't this avoid cost to the landowner?
Yes, I'm gonna ask that person to hold that question until a little bit later in my presentation, and then I will answer that one. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about line clearance qualification. Companies can be qualified to work around or near power lines. There's a couple of different categories of this. So you have incidental line clearance qualification. So tree work performed where an electrical hazard exists to the arborist, but the arborist is not working for the purpose of clearing space around the conductor on behalf of the utility that controls or operates the wires or lines. So essentially, you are not working for the utility, you're not contracted by the utility, and you're not clearing the lines on behalf of that utility, but you have done the necessary training to be able to work within 10 feet in certain circumstances. So this means that you've met the OSHA requirements and the OSHA training to complete incidental line clearance qualification, but you don't work within 10 feet on a daily basis, within 10 feet of those power lines. Now, this does not exempt you from utilizing 811. So if you're doing a private job on someone's property, even if you are incidental line clearance qualified and you've gone through this training, because you are not working on behalf of the utility, you have to go through the 811 process and notify us that you're going to be working. For the most part, we're going to say, yeah, sounds good. You're good to go, but we have to be aware that you're going to be doing that work. Not only just for safety, for our awareness, but also, you're provided documentation that says, hey, Georgia Power approved me to be doing this work within 10 feet of their line. So that if a Georgia Power employee happens to be driving by and they may see you doing work, let's say they stop and ask you, hey, you're pretty close to that line, or you're definitely working within 10 feet, you can produce that paper that says, hey, I'm incidental line clearance certified. I went through 811. I've got the sign off from, XYZ engineer at Georgia Power to do the job, and you're good to go to finish your job. Then you've got utility line clearance qualified, and these are companies or crews that have permission from utilities to work around their conductors on their behalf. So they've received safety and operation protocols and training from that utility that they're working with. And they're going to have a much smaller minimum approach than even an incidental line clearance qualified contractor will have. So their minimum approach is 31 inches. So no part of their body or the equipment they're working with can come within 31 inches of our line, which is going to be a much shorter distance from anyone else. And these crews work within 10 feet on a daily basis. There are examples where you've got companies that are kind of both. So, Georgia Power may contract with that company. And so their crews that are working on behalf of Georgia Power are utility line clearance qualified. But then they may have a sector of their business that does private residential work. And so in those circumstances, even though they're contracted by Georgia Power over here, when they're doing these residential jobs, they have to go through the 811 process just the same as anyone else would, even though they've got a contract with Georgia Power to provide crews. These residential crews, the crews doing the residential work, have to follow the 811 High Voltage Safety Act process. So kind of like I said before, both incidental and utility line clearance qualified companies, they've got to have documented electrical training. They've got to have on-the-job training. You have to have aerial rescue training, first aid and CPR, and their employer must certify that that individual doing that work is qualified under that company to be doing that work. So again, I already hit on this, but what if my company or crew is incidental line clearance certified? You're still required to notify 811, even if the personnel are incidental line clearance qualified. So please don't just show up to a job, then realize there's a power line there, and expect someone to come out that day and take a look at it for you. Don't take a chance and just show up and do the work, because I can tell you countless times that crews have been stopped by just someone driving by that works for Georgia Power saying, hey, you don't have the documentation to be doing work that close to the line. And then they kind of have to back out of their job and go through the process, and kind of makes things a little bit delayed. So, if you don't know, if you're not sure, you can always reach out to us. We can kind of walk you through the process as well, depending on the job that you're doing. So again, just kind of an overview of Georgia 811. So this is a specific to Georgia thing. Like I said, you can call 811, you can go on their website. You may have heard the slogan, call before you dig. It's the same people, but they do overhead tickets as well. So that's going to be if you're working in close proximity to an overhead utility rather than a utility that's buried underground. Same kind of premise though, just kind of a notification to that utility. If you are making that request on the phone, it is super easy. I will say that it is an automated process. So you may not talk to a real person, to start, but it's very easy to get through the steps to make these requests. Just make sure that you're specifying that it's an overhead ticket when you're making the request. So sort of in summary, the 811 process in Georgia, you call 811, 811 notifies the utility that a request has been made. We recommend that you make these requests, at least 72 hours in advance of when you want someone to kind of come out and look. it doesn't hurt to be, weeks in advance. Then, you've got plenty of time to have someone come out and meet you on site. And take a look at the job that you're doing, make sure that the process goes through, because a Georgia Power engineer will actually come out and meet you on site to take a look at the job that you're doing. So that is something that we kind of commit to, is just making sure that we lay eyes on what's going on. They may loop one of us in, one of the arborists in, to take a look at it as well. So then the utility, contacts you making the request. The utility reviews the work, arranges for it to be completed safely. Cost is generated based on the circumstances, and then the work is completed. So now I want to talk a little bit about specifically working with Georgia Power. So obviously it's very common for us to get customer calls with tree, power line concerns or conflicts, questions. So like I said, you call into customer service, or you kind of make a request on our forestry and right-of-way services website. And those inquiries are dispatched to coordinators. So those are our arborists in the field that kind of assist us with managing those customer tickets. Typically will be looked at within 5 to 7 business days, sometimes quicker, just kind of depending on the time of the year. And whether we get a heavy storm season, it may be a little longer before we come out to visit you, just depending on how busy we are. And then a lot of times either a door card will be left with our findings, which is kind of what you see here on the right. A lot of times a door card will be left, and we'll try to make contact with you either by knocking on your door or giving you a call if you've provided us with a phone number. And really what this is it's just a person, an arborist coming out, sort of reviewing what you've submitted as far as a request or a concern, either with you or just that arborist on site taking a look if you're not home at the time. And then kind of providing, professional opinion based off Georgia Power's policies on what exactly is there. What exactly you're asking. Is it something that we can help with? Is there somewhere else we can point you? What advice can we give you? So you can see on this door hanger, there's lots of options that we may choose on this card. And a lot of times we'll go over those with you on the phone as well. So like I said, this portion especially, I'm talking Georgia Power specific. So if you don't live in Georgia, you're not serviced by Georgia Power. I don't know exactly what policies are for other utilities, or if they have something similar to this, or what they may provide, but would hope that you would be able to, submit concerns and talk to somebody regardless of where you're at. So service lines, we get a lot of questions about service lines, and I hit on this earlier in my presentation. So service drop maintenance, and this is again the line that runs from the pole into your home or your business. Georgia Power does not provide any maintenance of these service drops, so you won't see us coming by and doing any trimming, any regular maintenance on these lines as far as vegetation goes. And we will disconnect that line if you request it, though. So because we're not really doing any maintenance of that line, if you decide, hey, I'd really like to get this line trimmed up, or hey, there's a tree here I really want to remove, you can call into customer service and request a service disconnect, and someone will come out, disconnect that line for you. You can do whatever work you need to be done, call back in, same day, someone will come back out and reconnect that line to your house. So that's sort of the safeguard that we've put into place for that work, but we just don't do any maintenance of those lines. And then again, phone and cable lines, we get lots of requests about trimming around those, and people, concerned with trees growing into those lines. Obviously, we're not going to do any maintenance on those because they're not ours, so we don't own those lines, and kind of defer that maintenance to the utility that owns them. tree removals. So hopefully this will answer the question that I put on hold from earlier, Jessi. But what happens if I submit a request to Georgia Power for them to look at a tree to be removed? So there's some factors that have to be considered with this one. So number one is a site evaluation is going to be required. So someone's going to have to come out and look at that tree. So one of our arborists will come out and take a look at that tree with you or for you. And basically just do a risk assessment on what that tree looks like. Does it have any obvious defects? Is it an imminent threat to the power lines? So you have to remember that, we're arborists operating on behalf of the utility. So, our main thing when we get there that we are considering is this tree an imminent threat to our power lines, to that reliable electricity that we're obligated to provide? Doesn't mean that we don't care about, the other risks that are out there, but that kind of has to be first and foremost our responsibility when we're taking a look and evaluating these trees. So factors to consider: is the tree outside the distribution right of way? So outside of that right of way, technically we don't really have the right to do anything out there if it's outside of our rights. So that's what we're going to take a look at first. And if it's outside of the right of way, more than likely it's going to be okay for private removal. It's going to be outside of that 10 feet from the line. We're also going to look at who owns the tree. So if the person making the request for the tree to be removed doesn't own the tree, well, then we have an issue there. So we kind of have to track down, ownership as well to make sure that we're communicating with the right people. It may be a situation, like I said, for an incidental line clearance qualified arborist. So we may get there and we don't see the tree as a threat. So we get out there and the tree is, 9 feet from the line, or its parts are 9 feet from the line, but it's a perfectly healthy tree. We don't see any structural defect. But the property owner wants it removed. That may be one that we turn down and say, hey, this one's okay for you to have removed privately, either with an incidental line clearance qualified arborist, or you can go through, any contractor and just have the line de-energized if you want the tree removed. So not necessarily going to remove a tree just because we're asked to remove it, especially if it's not posing a threat to the line. Even if the tree is outside of 10 feet, if you feel that the tree worker or the equipment may get within 10 feet at any point, call 811 and follow that High Voltage Safety Act. Bottom line is we just want to make sure everybody's safe in the work that they're doing. So a lot of information. I hope some of it was helpful for you. That's going to conclude kind of what I have to say. Of course, I'll stick around for questions. This is my contact info. If you think of something later that you want to ask, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll do my best to answer it. I'll leave this up here for a minute and for anyone that wants to snap a picture or jot this down. But that's going to conclude my presentation. I really appreciate all of y'all attending. I really appreciate the questions that were asked. And yeah, I'll stick around for anything else.
And just so everyone is aware, I did drop that link for the CEUs in the chat. Please take a minute to fill that out and give us some feedback. If you have suggestions for future programming, please make sure to include that there's a place on the form for that. So please, let us know if you'd like to see future programming and whatever topic you find interesting. So please let us know what you'd like to see. We do have a question. Let's see. Timothy Costley said, is the customer or contractor charged for getting portions of a high-risk dead tree removed over distribution lines to facilitate removal of a tree on private property where the tree has already partially failed? And then there's the second portion, so stay with me. Specifically, if the tree is an imminent threat to the public and property owner, is this part of Georgia Power Company's responsibility most EMCs have assisted us in the past with this type of situation. We've had problems in the past with Georgia Power in these scenarios.
Okay, yeah, let me dissect that one. I actually pulled it up so I can read it and make sure that I answer it correctly. Okay, so the first part of it is the customer or contractor charged for getting portions of a high risk or dead tree removed over distribution lines to facilitate removal of a tree on private property where the tree has already partially failed? Okay, so it kind of depends. So if you are needing the line to be de-energized, then yes, you may have to you may acquire a charge in I guess conjunction with doing that work. I will say we will in some circumstances assist with a removal if some of those tree parts are really close to the line and we just kind of need to get some of those hazardous pieces that are either overhanging the line or that are very close to the line. We will sometimes send a crew to kind of assist to sort of get you out of that hazard zone, for lack of a better word. So we may trim back, some off of that tree. We may remove, a broken or a hanging piece for you so that you can take the rest of that tree down. In that circumstance, you would not incur a charge for that work. However, if we are not assisting with that, so let's say it's outside of minimum approach or it's not, hanging or broken, not something that we see as sort of an imminent threat, even if it's just overhanging the line. If it's outside that minimum approach distance and you go through 811 to have the line de-energized, yes, you will acquire a charge for that work. And like I said before, when we come and look at these situations, our main focus is, are we preventing threats to the power line? Not that we don't care about, someone's home or a tree falling on their home, but, our main focus for, hey, are we going to remove this tree? Are we going to assist with the removal? Is it an imminent threat to the line? A lot of that is kind of a gray area, unfortunately, and I don't mind saying that, but really it's going to come down to having someone come out there and look at it. So my main recommendation is if you get into those circumstances, have the arborist for that area come out and look at it. They're going to give you their best professional opinion on what needs to be done as far as Georgia Power assisting. As far as it being a part of our responsibility, so we are responsible for keeping the power line clear of vegetation. I would say we are responsible for kind of identifying hazardous trees that are imminent threats to the line. Doesn't mean that we own those trees. So even if they're on the right of way, even if we have trimmed them in the past, we are not the owners of the trees. So as far as us being responsible for their removal or for maintenance of those trees, wouldn't necessarily say that. I hate to hear that you may have had problems working with Georgia Power in the past. Like I said, it's hard to give an answer on those types of scenarios without sort of, knowing what the situation is or being able to see the tree. So that's kind of my best answer for you, is just have someone come out and look at the tree. Like I said, I can never promise that, Georgia Power arborist will deem that something that we need to assist with, kind of depending on the situation, but definitely worth having someone look at.
There is a follow-up there, Jessi, if you see that as well. Do you want me to read it or?
Yeah, I got it here.
Okay.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, just to follow up there. Yeah, saying expectations were set with his client, his or her client, that it may take 3 to 4 weeks to get it assessed with Georgia Power. As far as having our arborist assess a tree, 3 to 4 weeks would not be considered acceptable from our standards of having someone come out and look at something for the most part. Like I said, depending, if there might be extraneous circumstances, but typically we try to get there within 5 to 7 business days. As far as engineering, again, they kind of have an obligation to react within a reasonable time frame. 3 to 4 weeks does seem kind of like a long time to me, but I can't control what they're doing. But yeah, my hope is that this is not an arduous process for people going through it, because that would kind of defeat the purpose and actually kind of give people a reason not to go through it. And then you've got people taking risks out there, working around lines. So, I think that getting the awareness out there of the process and just hoping that, over time things can go smoother, and as the awareness gets out there, more people utilize the process, maybe get a better turnaround. And then, okay, we've got another follow-up here. So what he's saying is, he would rather it be longer than shorter, which is, I understand that you want to make sure you get a good look at it. And he's saying that it was actually one of our contractors that looked at it, not engineering or an arborist from Georgia Power. So we do have some contracted arborists that work with us that kind of work as an extension of Georgia Power. So, but anyways, yeah, hopefully that question got answered. Anything else in there, Jessi?
I don't see any other questions. So last call for questions. We are a little bit over time. So thank you everyone for sticking around and listening to all of this great information. If there are no other questions, then we will adjourn for the evening. Thank you so much, Jessi, for this presentation. It's very valuable information. I hope everybody learned something. And we'll see you next month at the Lunch and Learn webinar with Save Georgia Hemlock. So please join us for that one. That will be next month, free for members. So sign up for that. Thank you and have a great evening.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.